So if you go inside the app.view, first thing that you'll see here is that a component doesn't need to be wrapped anymore inside one element that has all the other nodes of that component. So this would be a syntax for view 2, but now inside view 3 you don't need it anymore, and now you can have as many children components or elements after the template. So that's great. You don't have to create another div just for the sake of doing it. So that was a limitation of view 2 that was kind of annoying, and now you don't have to do it. So let's just go right inside the main.js, and we can see something pretty interesting here is that it hasn't changed much. It's basically the same. Now you have the mount, and also here you can after this you can define a component, and it would be the same way. You can define it with a name, and then here you can define it with this, of course. Whoops. And this would be a syntax for defining components. It's kind of similar to the one that we had before in view 2, where we had the view and then the component, but now we have it like this. So now we have another way of sharing code between components and having the same logic in one place and not having to copy paste it. This was you could do this before using mixins and scope slots, but that wasn't ideal because mixins would introduce some problems. So you could run into a problem where some mixins have the same name, some properties or methods, and that's not clear what mixin is exposing what, and yeah, that would lead to a lot of issues. Another one is that when you have a mixin, you cannot pass properties to it. You cannot pass a parameter to change the behavior of that mixin. So you could kind of do it with some workarounds, but it wasn't pretty. So that's why in view 3 now we have the composition API, and the composition API it's basically another way of encapsulating our code and making it more reusable. It comes very handy once you've got a very big project. In this case, I'm gonna be building a very simple to do, and it might not show like the full potential of it, but I think it's pretty interesting nonetheless to give it a try. So let's just first use the setup method, which is basically this is called before the created. So this is called before the created method or lifecycle event, and it gets two parameters, one being the props and the other being a context. Inside this context we have we have the method emit. We have also access to the reference, and we can also access attributes of the component. So that's very handy. In this case, we don't need it. The linting is gonna go crazy. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is basically create a data property called to-do list. To-do list, and it's gonna be a reference. And as we have it here imported, let's just declare the initial state of this as an empty array. So in order to show this here inside the template, we need to expose it. And the way that we do it is returning an object that contains any value that you want to expose. Here we can have data properties, computed properties, methods, and watchers. The watchers, we don't need to expose them since they don't interact with the template directly. You cannot call a watcher from the template directly. So the way that we're going to do is like to-do list, and now here we can just say to-do list, and if we go here we'll see an empty array. That's great. So now let's just add an item to this to-do list. The way that we're going to do this is creating a method. So let's just do function add to-do item. And what we're gonna do is to-do list dot, and you see that it gives me a value, because if I were to change the to-do list is not the actual value, it's just a wrapper. And if we go here, we can see that this is returning a reference. you see here. And that's the great thing about Vue 3. Because everything has been rewritten in TypeScript, we can just jump inside the code and see what is expecting and what's gonna return. In this case, it's gonna return a toRef. Okay, that's great. So let's just go back, and because now let's just, for the sake of this, let's just rename this to an empty array but with one item. And as you can see, this is not gonna work. I'm getting here is a constant, cannot be reassigned. So if I go back here, to-do list, I cannot change this. So what I can do is value and change the value of it. Add to do, let's just expose this. Now this add to do item is available inside our template. So let's just have a button here that says add, and when we do click, we can add to do item. So we press this, now we have an item. That's great, it's working. Now that we have this, let's just make this a push. So we aren't just reassigning, we are actually pushing a new item, and let's just have it like this. Now every single time that we click, it's gonna push a new item. Ideally, we would want an input also. So let's just move this real quick above and have here an input. And it's gonna be of type text, pretty simple, and placeholder to do. Let's just go back, and we have this. So most of the bindings that you know from Vue 2 will work perfectly on Vue 3. The most common one in this case is gonna be the module, and we need something called a text, right? Now let's just create another reference that's gonna call text, or better to do text reference is gonna be an empty. And now we have to do this, but in order to use it here, I need to expose it. Quick tip, it's good practice, or it's like easier to have everything grouped by the state, methods, computed, whatever you're using. So I like to do the data properties before the methods. It doesn't really affect, because this is just an object, it doesn't really matter, but it's great that you have it there. And here, instead of pushing an item, we want to get the to-do text and the value. And now this is gonna work. If we go here, boom. Okay, that's working, that's nice. After this, we want to do text dot value equals an empty. We want to just clean the text. So after this, we want to just clean the value of the input. Okay, that's great. Now we have this. Let's just make it a little bit prettier, and here let's just change it to a list. Li item, let's just grab this in here, and Vue 4 item in to-do list. And then here we also will need a key. From the Vue 3 documentation, I've seen that it's actually not even necessary, but for some reason the linting still asks me to have it, so I'm just gonna put it there. And yeah, to do, let's just call it to do. I think it makes more sense. Now we have the list, and we are pushing, and this works. Now let's make it a little bit more complex, and instead of pushing this, just an empty string, not an empty string, but instead of pushing just a string, let's just push an object that has a value. and then another key called is done, and let's just set it to false. And here, instead of to do, we're gonna get to do.text. If it's not technically this is not unique, so we could do something like this, where we have a random value. This would make it unique, or we can here just do to do dot id, and here we can generate a unique id. The way that we can do this is very simple. Now we have a kind of unique. Now that we have an id here, everything should work. Now let's just go back. Oops. Value. Oops, value. That was the mistake. Now that we have this, it's working. Now we want to underline, or at least remove or do something every single time that we click on a to-do item. So the way that we're gonna do this is, first let's add here an on click toggle, and let's just call it toggle is done. This is not created, so we need to add it here when we have it as a method. And what we can do is here pass the ID, and here we can just have an ID, which is to do.id. Now we need the to do item. So the way that we're going to do this is basically a very simple filtering. We have here a to-do list dot value. This is going to get us the array. Now we can do a filter, and we can do here for each to do, and let's just go to do.id not equal to id. Let's just console log this to do that item. Let's just get rid of the linting. Let's just add one, and I think I missed something. Oh, it needs to be equal. My bad. And we have it here. In fact, we're getting an array, so we would actually need the first one. What we would do is get the to do item. The thing here is that I don't like to do directly something like this, and the reason being is because what happens if this is null or this is undefined? This will break. So the way that we're gonna do this is just have this as matching IDs, and technically an ID is unique. So now that we have this, and we can check the length of it, if it equals to 0, let's just return. Otherwise, we have here const typo there to do item, which is gonna be matching IDs, the first one. Now that we have this, we can log it again to do item. Let's just go back, and we have it here. That's great. Now we can do something like this. Dot value to do item dot value equals, and here is done. And let's just get the same and negate it. And in order to show this here, let's just go with to do is done, some ternary operator to check done, and if it's false, not done. Let's just go back here, add it, not done. We click on it and we get, so we had to actually the value, we didn't need the value here, that was my mistake. But let's just console log it again to do that item without the actual matching. Let's just clean this, and we can see here that we don't need it. The target, we have here the value, and we can access anything, so we didn't need the second value. We weren't accessing a reference like this kind of reference object. It was actually the value that we're defining here, so that's why I was getting an issue there. But now that we have this, we can just toggle it, and this is it. Now we can mark to-dos as done if we want them. Now another thing is that now that we have this, we've seen some methods, we've seen here some data properties. Now let's just go and see some computed properties. The way that we do this is we need a method called computed, and this will accept two parameters. The first one being if you want to just get a getter or like a normal computed property, you can do it directly with a callback like this. Or if you want to have both a computed and a setter, you can pass an object that has a get, okay, and that's going to be your getter, and then you have a setter. That's if you want to have a more advanced usage of a computed property. In this case, let's just leave it like this, and the thing that we're going to do is basically do a filtering to see how many of our to-do list items are marked as done. So the way that we're going to do this is very straightforward. To-do lists value, of course, because we have the reference, we cannot access this directly. We need to access, this is an object that is going to be listening for changes when we make changes to the value. Okay, so now let's just do a filter, and then here we have to do list or to do list item, and let's just return to do list dot is done. So we're gonna name this something like completed to-dos, and now we're gonna expose it, and here have this. Let's just go back. I'm getting some linting. Let's just suppress this real quick. Oh, and I'm missing here at the end of it a length. I was getting the array. So now let's just do this, and we see that we have a computed property. So now that we have data, some methods, and also a computed property here, let's just watch how to do a watcher. A watcher accepts two things. The first one is going to be whatever we're going to be basically watching for. In this case, it's going to be a to-do list, and then the second argument is going to be the callback that is going to be running every single time that this changes. So in our case, let's just say an alert to say, hey, good job. And now we have it like this. And actually, we don't want to listen for only the to-do list. We want to listen for the completed to-dos, because that's what would make sense. So we add here a new to-do, and when we mark it, we get, hey, good job. And that's gonna happen when this is basically changed or it's updated. That widget is gonna be called, hey, good job. Take a look that we don't need the value here. We could actually pass here a callback and do .value, and this would actually work in theory. You see, it works the same way, but it's not needed. And I like this one better because it's way cleaner. Whatever we are expecting to be changed, and Vue is gonna do a little bit of the magic behind the scenes to get the value and basically make this work. Okay, so we have the basic functionality of our Vue app. These are the building blocks, and as you can see, it's very similar to the options API. Not much is changing, it's just different the way that we have this here. Another thing are basically the lifecycle events, and the way that those work are also very easy. We don't have the uncreated or created, basically, because that method, it's the one that you are here. If you want to use the composition API lifecycle events, if you want to run something on the created, you will have to do it inside the setup. If you want to access the mounted, now it's called unmounted. And we have this here. We can have them like this, and this is going to be a method that accepts a callback, or here they call it hook, but basically it's a callback. And let's just say that this is on mounted, and let's just get another one, which is gonna be, instead of updated, is gonna be unupdated. Let's just paste this in here, the same. Now let's just go here, and we see the mounted. And now when we update our page, we will see the updated. Here is gonna do it again. If I type, it's gonna do it again. So these are basically the basics of the composition API, something that you should learn and absolutely master if you wanna be very proficient at Vue when you are building very big apps, because this is the way. So the great thing of this is that, as you can see, we don't have any this, which allows us basically to wrap this in a method and have it inside our app in a folder that that we can call something like use. This is from the Vue documentation. It's gonna be a JavaScript file, and use to do list or something like that. And basically we can export default. We can just grab all of this and just paste that in here. It's gonna work the same way. And now what we have to do is just return this to-do list, basically all the things that we were using before. So I'm gonna go here inside the example, copy this from here, paste that in here, and now what we do is basically some destructuring, and here we need use to-do list. So what just happened is that I moved all my code inside this function. Now this is living by itself in another JavaScript file, and can be reused anywhere in our view components. So anytime that we need some logic that's similar to this or is exactly the same, we can just reuse it like this. And this is actually great because now this is kinda like a mixin, but with a lot of benefits. One being that we can decide what can we expose or what won't we expose. Secondly, is very clear when you are importing it. You have this method here. Let me just have it like this. I think it will be clear. So we have this here. Okay, the linting. So we have this here, a use to-do list, and we get all these properties from here. And then when we expose them inside this component. The great thing here is that we can actually pass props to this or any parameter. Let's say that we want to cap the amount of to-do list items that you can push inside this array. Let's just say 10. Let's just pass here a parameter called max. And inside here, where we push, we want to check if max equals to-do list that value plus 1. Okay, we want to just alert, return an alert, hey, the max is, and here we're gonna pass the max. Now let's just add 10. I should have picked a smaller number. That's my fault. Actually, I can. Oops, a length here. My mistake. And we can see that now there's a max. And this is actually great. So this is the great thing about the composition API, is that now we have all this logic that is encapsulated inside this method, and we can access any of the method computer properties, data properties that this method or function is exposing, and it's very clear. And this helps to have a more structured code and a code that's more reusable, and at the end of the day is gonna cause less issues overall. We can also simplify these references and not have to use these values that we have this, using basically another wrapper that the Vue 3 provides us is called Reactive. Okay, I think that I'll have to import this Reactive, and inside of this we can declare this as, you can see here, and now we can remove this. Now what we have to do is do something like this. We don't need the value anymore. We do need to access .text, and here we can remove the value. And here what we have to do is basically expose this, but we need another method called refs to refs, and basically it does what it says. It's gonna make this some references. So now if we go here, okay, the linting is complaining. So now we have basically the same behavior, but without having to use the dot value. So these were the basics of the composition API. I would love to make some, I don't know, Stack Overflow clones or some e-commerce with Vue 3, with Laravel Express. I don't know which stack I would pick, but definitely something with Vue. So if you guys are interested on me doing those videos, those tutorials, just let me know on the comment section down below and I'll make sure to make those. If you liked the video, leave me a thumbs up, and yeah, see you in the next video. See ya.